Now we're going to look at part 2 of an empirical look at intergenerational ministry with best practices from exemplars. Let's talk about intergenerational mentoring. That's one of the really powerful ways to help adolescents have greater faith longevity, is connecting them with mentors. Now, before we go any further, I need to define a few terms for you. The difference between multi-generational and intergenerational, because this gets confusing. Here's what I mean. Multi-generational is when all the generations are, let's say, in the same room, okay? So you have a banquet, you have some sort of fundraiser, you have a worship service, you have a meeting, and there's 16 to 86-year-olds in the same room. Well, that's multi-generational. You've got them in the room. Intergenerational is when generations are not just sharing a room or sharing a meeting, but they're sharing life together. It's actual relationship happening, not just breathing the same air, but truly journeying together. Now, a lot of times multi-generational is an important precursor to intergenerational, but don't be satisfied with multi-generational, which is why mentoring is so important. Mentoring can help you move from multi-generational to intergenerational. Now, my friend and colleague here at Fuller, Chap Clark, says a lot of brilliant things, but I think one of the most brilliant things he said is we need a new 5-to-1 ratio. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, what Chap talks about is, a lot of ministries, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of churches, when they have events coming up or just programs overall, they'll say, well, we want one adult for every 5 kids. One adult for every 5 kids. Well, what Chap is saying is let's reverse that and have 5 adults for each kid. Now, before you email me and say, Kara, that's not feasible. I'm having a hard enough time finding 1 adult for 5 kids, let alone 5 adults for each kid. We're not talking about 5 small group leaders. We're not talking about 5 Bible study leaders. We're talking about 5 adults who are on a young person's team. That's how we say it at our family. We talk with our kids about who's on your team. Who are those adults who are part of your team? Often, it's fascinating to see young people and older adults matched by hobby or interest. A young person wants to learn to cook, and hey, a 50-year-old knows how to cook. Match the two of them together. And when we talk about intergenerational and this kind of mentoring, it's not just adult to teenager. It's also the way that adults are hopefully mentoring younger adults. So the way that 70-year-old is mentoring a 50-year-old who's mentoring a 30-year-old who's then mentoring that 3-year-old. But one of the really practical ways for you to get started, a best practice, is for you to start talking with your students and with their parents about who are those 5 adults that you can go to no matter what. A lot of churches' best practices are doing intergenerational teaching. This could be in the Sunday morning worship service, or it could be some kind of joint Sunday school experience. This is what our church did and does periodically, often for a season, like 6 weeks or maybe over the summer. We'll do intergenerational teaching. Here's a picture from one of our more recent intergenerational teaching sessions. You can see there's people of all ages there. I taught that particular morning, and I co-taught with a 70-year-old. So we were trying to model intergenerational teaching even from who does the teaching. Because in case you're wondering, I am a different generation than a 70-year-old. So if you're wondering where to start with intergenerational connections to build adolescent faith longevity, I highly recommend service and justice work. There's a lot of teenagers and adults who they're intimidated by each other. That adult looks at a teenager and feels like they don't know what to talk to, and the teenager looks at the adult and isn't totally sure how to connect either. So sometimes instead of getting kids and adults sitting face to face, it's better off if they're serving shoulder to shoulder. If they're painting that local public school together, or handing a sandwich to someone who's homeless and then sitting together and talking to that homeless individual. It takes training, though, to really help all generations involved understand the importance of not just the service that they're doing, but in building intergenerational relationships. One youth pastor, who's actually a Fuller alum, emailed me not too long ago and said, I have some fun intergenerational news. A couple weeks ago, I reached out to Galileans, this is one of the Sunday school classes, to be our prayer sponsors for our New Orleans trip. They gladly agreed, and they have cards now with students' names and faces on them, and we'll be praying through July 25th. What's more, we had a barbecue with them yesterday, and they got to meet and greet the students and pray with them for the trip. Lots of good starter connections. Once we get back, the plan is to have a joint class time with them where we share about the trip. I love this. Even though the trip, the service and justice work was pretty much just the youth ministry, this smart youth pastor was saying, how do we build intergenerational relationships by the way young people connect before and after the trip? It's also about just broader intergenerational integration. That's kind of hard to say. Intergenerational integration. Thinking about how young people can be involved in leadership, not just adults, but teenagers also. Kids serving on church committees. Maybe not just one kid on a church committee, because that can be a little overwhelming. Maybe there's 2 or 3 kids serving together. So they feel a little bit more, at least have that support of a peer. I love some churches that are thinking about, when it comes to leadership and intergenerational integration, instead of just having teenagers intern in the children's ministry, maybe they intern, or college students intern with the women's ministry, the men's ministry, the worship ministry. I love churches' best practices where it comes to intergenerational integration. They're thinking about programming, where adults or senior adults do road trips and show up in a church band to kids' performances, where Sunday school classes are adopting grades, not literally, but they're praying for those grades. Programs that create this kind of intergenerational integration. All church camps and campouts. I'll tell you, getting away with people from different generations is so powerful. One church did a new Christian birthday party where the whole church was invited, and everybody who had become a Christian in the last year, no matter what age, were brought to the front, and they were sung happy birthday. I love that. Juniors and senior dance, or depending on your denomination, maybe for our Baptist friends, you call it a banquet. But the juniors are the teenagers and the seniors are the senior adults. Now, if you hear me saying you need to start a bunch of new programs, that may not be the case. I love what this church in Oklahoma did. The men's ministry was going to go play paintball war, and they wanted to make it more intergenerational. So the men's ministry decided to invite the high school boys to go with them. Now, they might have wanted to do target practice. I don't know. But I love that the men's ministry didn't say, we need to do something new. They said, how can we take what we're already doing and bring an intergenerational flavor to it? Now, when it comes to adolescent faith longevity and intergenerational relationships, there's one group with amazing untapped potential to pour into young people, and it's this group, senior adults. Senior adults, there's just a special tenderness between senior adults and teenagers, a special connection. I wish I had a more researchy word for it, but tenderness is the best one that I've got. I want to play you a video now of a church in Southern California here who heard about bringing the generations together, and I want you to listen to Sue and Nick's story as they talk about what their relationship has meant to them. I love that line about a cougar. In fact, I use that video to teach about intergenerational relationships at a church, and I heard afterwards from a mom that her 12-year-old son, because it was an intergenerational morning at church that morning, her 12-year-old son leaned over after the video and said, "Mom, what's a cougar?" So, it gave her an interesting opportunity to explain a new term to her son. Now, in all candor, if I can be honest, we've had youth leaders, Fuller students like you say, okay, I love the idea of intergenerational relationships, but what do I do if I don't want the kids in our church or in our ministry to become like the adults in our church or the adults they're surrounded by? I mean, that's a really honest question. What do you do if you don't want the kids in your ministry to have the faith of the adults they're around? There are most definitely some of you who are in that boat. My best answer is to pull from the game Red Rover. And in this game, you call out for people to come over. You individually invite folks to come on over to your side. I love that video, and in fact, I played it when I was teaching at a church, and it was an intergenerational morning, a worship morning at the church, and so I played the video, and a 12-year-old boy leaned over to his mom after the video. She told me later, leaned over to his mom and said, "Mom, what's a cougar?" So, it gave her a chance to explain a new term to her son. So you never know what's going to happen in church. Maybe you're sitting here or standing wherever you're watching this video with this question in your mind. It's a question we've heard from numerous youth pastors, numerous Fuller students. They say this: what do you do if you don't want the kids in your ministry to have the faith of the adults in your church, or to have the faith of the adults they're around? That's a very provocative, poignant question. And I think my best way of explaining how you respond is we just have to be more selective in the adults we recruit and invite to spend time around our young people. It's a little bit like the game Red Rover, where you had two different teams and you individually call out an adult and ask them to come on over to your team. Instead of just kind of doing come one, come all, which adults want to hang out with kids. If you're in a situation where you're not head over heels about the faith of the adults, you might need to be more selective and do some one-on-one recruiting, because that's the way that you can develop a team that shapes your kids and helps them experience the love and the grace and the power of the gospel. Thanks.